So let's turn our attention to the International Space Station. This is one of those occasions where we can't really trust two-dimensional media, because all we have is images and video that supposedly prove that there's an International Space Station up there and it's been manned since 1999. One of the most visible indications that there are people up in space inside the International Space Station is that they're in zero gravity. However, NASA has an aircraft known as the Vomit Comet, and when this aircraft takes a certain flight path, the people inside feel weightlessness. So it's almost certain that NASA has an aircraft fitted out to look like the International Space Station's interior. Now take a look at this.
Hello, Katie.
Notice how suddenly as she starts to wave, she floats out of control.
This is so cool, isn't it? Hey, Katie, I want to
welcome
ask you
aboard
a
the
question.
space station.
This is Leah. Look at this. Wow.
The same thing happens here. As the plane starts its zero-G dive, the people start to spontaneously float upwards. The other problem with this technique is that this aircraft can only simulate zero gravity in 45-second to a minute bursts. So NASA employs many little tricks here to simulate weightlessness. None of their footage is live, it's all pre-recorded and edited, so plenty of scope there to use some of the cinematic tricks that we're used to, like harnesses and wires that are edited out later with CGI. But here we can see one of the tricks they use to maintain continuity between periods of weightlessness. Take a look at this woman's hair. Doesn't it look a bit strange to you? Look how it seems to spring back into place. We're led to believe that this is an effect of weightlessness, that the hair will just sort of float around. But it doesn't quite seem natural, does it? Here's video from the Vomit Comet again. Watch the way this woman's hair flows as she moves. Seems quite obvious now that this is some kind of perm or hairspray, so that between periods of weightlessness we get that visual continuity. Now, there are plenty of examples of these gravitational anomalies, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I just wanted to show that all these things that you can see from NASA can be simulated and CGI'd up for your benefit. They don't seem to do any real scientific experiments up there. The effort seems to be just to get you to believe that they're there. That's it. There are also plenty of anomalies when you look at spacewalks. For footage of spacewalks on the exterior of the International Space Station, NASA will freely admit they have a huge swimming pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, where they train their astronauts, and within this huge swimming pool they have a mock-up of the exterior of the International Space Station. I'm going to show you a video from a YouTuber called Jungle Surfer, who's done the best expose of spacewalking anomalies.
Another aspect of the illusion of space travel is spacewalks. These are faked inside a swimming pool. It's a custom-built swimming pool, and that's a great way to fake zero gravity. About 6 months ago, in 2013, a gallon of water leaked into one of their spacesuits in a matter of seconds. NASA doesn't really have a proper explanation for how on earth this could have happened. There shouldn't be water leaking into someone's helmet and a person almost drowning in space. How can you drown in space? They now wear snorkels to make sure that they don't drown in space. How can this be happening? A snorkel in space? There could be some water in the porous plate sublimator. When they were on the moon, they supposedly had about a gallon of water, but that cooling system is supposed to be well away from their head. There really is no sane explanation for why a gallon of water would leak into someone's spacesuit, unless you realise the whole thing is faked inside a swimming pool. In this scene, you can see the Chinese spacewalk, and you can see a bubble coming up from the guy's suit. How do you have a bubble in space? Space is supposed to be a vacuum, not a swimming pool. But it's obviously just a swimming pool filled with water. Obviously, there would be some equipment that they could only fix from the outside, but a lot of these spacewalks, it seems like equipment they easily could have configured to be accessible from the inside of the International Space Station. It seems more like an excuse to get out and show their other space trick, which is the faking of spacewalks in a swimming pool. In this vid, you catch a glimpse of someone wearing a scuba tank. Scuba tanks in space? Snorkels and scuba tanks in space? They act like a spacewalk is just a walk in the park, like there's very little danger involved at all. They're looking through the spacesuits. Oh, here's a spacesuit, we're going to go for a spacewalk. As if there's no danger at all, like they don't care. They don't care. They don't act like they're in a life-threatening situation, like they could die at any second, even though they can. So you would think to preserve their life they would want to minimize the amount of spacewalking that they did. But there seems to be an abundance of equipment on the outside of the International Space Station that constantly requires repairing, which makes for a good TV spectacle and is inspired by movies like Sandra Bullock's Gravity. And after Gravity came out, they, of course, had to do another spacewalk to fix some emergency, some piece of equipment that their lives depend on that, amazingly, they can fix every time. But you know what? Thanks to the genius of the engineers at NASA, they employ snorkels in space now, so that should stop them from drowning.
Finally, I'm going to leave the last word to one of the astronauts themselves, when he made a tiny little slip-up during a question and answer session. Take note of his body language after he makes his mistake.
Hello, my name is Bailey. This question is for Chris. What was high school like for you?
Well, it was the 1980s, so the music was different, the hairstyle was different, the clothes we wore were different than today, but probably in 5 or 10 years it'll be the same. And in school, I was just like you, probably all of you there. I tried my best. I didn't always succeed, didn't always do well, but I put my best effort into school. Math and science were kind of my favorite subject. I didn't really like English and reading too much, but I've since grown out of that, and I enjoy reading now. And I played a lot of sports. And all of that happened in a little town called York, Maine, across the United States from where we're talking to you right now.
Whoops.
Called York, Maine, across the United States from where we're talking to you right now.
Hello, my name is Steve Owen. I'm a teacher here at Riverside Prep. I'd like to ask you about the stress associated with the long periods in the space station. I'd like to ask Karen, what is the training that you get to cope with that stress and related psychological issues?
Well, for psychological issues, actually, when we are selected as astronauts, we go through quite a vigorous psychological screening process. You certainly don't want somebody who comes up here and has a breakdown or is claustrophobic. But also, we have like Chris's background as a Navy SEAL and Luca's background as a test pilot clearly prepare them for high stress situations. I could also argue that going through the process of getting a PhD can be a high stress thing as well. And so generally when people get to the point where they're applying for this job, they've been through several things in their life that are high stress and have proven that they can handle.
Humans in space? I'm not even sure there is such a thing as space anymore. So, could the Earth really be flat? Most people, when they think of a flat Earth, immediately think, what happens when you get to the edge? Well, the flat Earth model is a flat circular disk with a north magnetic pole in the centre, and all the continents are laid out around it. On the edge of this disk is a wall of ice, and we call it Antarctica. There is no South Pole. That's why you can't fall off the flat Earth. The wall of ice keeps the oceans in and stops you from reaching the edge. Strangely enough, the only other place that this model is used is in the United Nations logo. Looks like they know something that we don't. As you can see on the UN logo, the flat Earth map is overlaid with a grid. And that grid divides the Earth into 33 sections. And also, there's no Antarctica on this map. It's almost as if that grid were like bars, like a cell, locking us away from Antarctica, which is precisely what they're doing. The United Nations countries are all signatories to the Antarctica Treaty, which basically bans anybody from going to Antarctica. And if there's any absolute proof of either the globe Earth or the flat one, then I believe the answers would be in Antarctica. But before we examine Antarctica, I'd like to take a look at flights in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, this information came to me through Mark Sargent and his Flat Earth Clues. A lot of people say that Mark is a shill. I communicated with him over email. He seemed like a decent bloke. So I'm not going to say he's a shill. He has his ideas, his views, his perspectives, as I have mine, and everybody else has theirs. So I'm not going to say he's a shill, but nonetheless, his Flat Earth Clues were very well done, and I got a lot out of them, so thank you, Mark. The crux of this issue is the lack of direct flights in the Southern Hemisphere. I took a look at some of these flights, and particularly focused on flights from Cape Town to Auckland, New Zealand. Generally, flights in the Southern Hemisphere tend to be indirect, with one or more connections and lengthy layovers. Such is the case with this one from Cape Town to Auckland. This flight came out around about 37 hours with a connecting flight in Dubai. Now if you look on a map, Cape Town to Auckland is a straight shot across the Indian Ocean, 7,310 miles. That should take about 12 hours. But in this case, we're taking thousands of miles north to Dubai, then back down south to Melbourne, and then across to Auckland. It doesn't make any sense. Until, that is, you look at it on the Flat Earth model. Now you can see it's a straight line from Cape Town to Dubai to Melbourne, and the distance is more like 16,000 miles. So the total journey time of 37 hours is there to hide the fact that your actual flight time is 26 hours rather than 11 or 12. Now, I did find one direct flight operated by Qantas, but who knows? The flight was 14 hours long, but does that flight actually exist? I don't know. Short of booking that flight and flying it, I wouldn't know. But it strikes me that you could advertise such a flight, price it beyond the reach of most people, and cancel it for anybody who does take it. But that's just speculation. Now, the GPS system would obviously show up any anomalies in the flight plan, but it seems they've found a very simple way of getting around that problem, and that is switching off GPS tracking for all flights in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, this is an image from Flight Tracker, and you can see straight off that in the Northern Hemisphere you will see planes over the ocean, but there are none in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, I spent some time looking at it on flighttracker.com, and I actually verified this information, but I couldn't capture the data on my computer. So here's a video of planes disappearing and reappearing off the tracking systems.
So hey guys, I'm on planefinder.net. I'm tracking airplanes in the Southern Hemisphere, trying to do some research to verify or debunk this flat Earth guy. And what he said is that airplanes disappear in the South Atlantic near the, in the Southern Hemisphere when they fly over oceans. And it's true. I was tracking a British Airways flight from Buenos Aires to London, and I was tracking, and then it disappeared. And then I clicked on this plane right here, Qatar. See how the flight path, like when you click on the plane, the flight path appears or disappears, right? So I clicked on this plane looking for my British Airways flight, and I found this flight, and look, see how the flight path just starts in the middle of nowhere right here? His flight path starts in the middle of nowhere. That's because what they do with flights in the Southern Hemisphere is they disappear them. They turn off the GPS over the ocean, and then they reappear the flights about an hour before landing. And that's exactly what the Flat Earth guy said they do. And that's exactly what they're doing. This guy's going to Rome. Okay. So this is a pretty good flight to track because he's going all the way to Europe. So I just clicked on this flight, same thing. This guy, we should have saw him before when we were tracking the other plane and when we were tracking this plane that's heading to Rome. But this guy, when we were tracking the plane headed to Rome, he wasn't even on the map. He's coming from Abu Dhabi. It's in the Middle East. He's been in the air for what, 12, 13, 14, 15 hours? He's been in the air for 7,000 miles, and we're just picking him up right here. We're just picking him up in the middle of nowhere. Look, they disappeared the flight over the entire ocean, and they're reappearing it for landing about an hour before landing. Think about it. He's got 500 miles to go. It's about an hour before landing, just like the Flat Earth guy said. I mean, take a look at what this guy's flight path should look like on a Flat Earth model. This stuff's crazy. You have to look into this for yourselves. Don't pretend like you know everything, because you only know what you've been taught, and we know that the stuff we've been taught was a bunch of bullshit. So we need to question everything. Question everything, but don't believe everything. Question everything. There's a big difference.
Now, I know a lot of this evidence seems circumstantial, but there are many flights in the Southern Hemisphere that have stopovers in seemingly nonsensical places that only make sense on a flat Earth. Santiago, Chile to Auckland, for instance, stops over in Los Angeles. Nonsensical on a globe makes perfect sense on a flat Earth. And the only way to verify these flight paths just happens to be switched off for all Southern Hemisphere flights. Circumstantial, I'll grant you, but compelling nonetheless.